Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? Welcome on into the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name's Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. What's poppin', Rick?
What's up?
I'm watching baseball in the corner over here, so forgive me if I look off to the side.
I'm the only person in America to be doing that.
I'm just going to enjoy baseball, okay? Under the age of 40. We'll see. Everyone in Boston is a playoff team. You could argue the Patriots aren't anymore.
I'll watch the Red Sox in the playoffs.
I just like it gives me something to watch. And there's literally no 7 o'clock games until a couple weeks from now, so I can just slap this.
We're about to be in peak playoff season though for hockey and basketball.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I'll totally forget about. See, that's what happens. I start watching baseball when it first comes out, and then the playoffs happen for hockey and basketball, and I'm like, all right, see you later.
We'll see in July.
Yeah, see you in July when there's nothing else on again. But anyway, welcome to Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. And for this show, for the first time in the year, we're going to get to a little bit of projecting and looking forward into the 2022 fantasy football season and begin to give you advice on what to do in your drafts coming up in July, August, and even maybe early September. So we're going to talk about some must-draft wide receivers, guys that you need to have on your fantasy team by the time the season's end. Whether you're in redraft, best ball, doesn't matter. You got to have these receivers. They're going to have good seasons. So we'll do that. Before we do, check out our website, fantasychampions.com, which is still broken, so maybe not check it out. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review and share this pod with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below any questions you have for us. You ready to get to it, Rick?
Let's do it.
We'll get into it right quick. All right, so like I said, must-draft wide receivers. These are guys, like, obviously, you look at the top of the rankings and you see guys like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. I don't know about Adams. I'm kind of fading. But anyway, you see some of these top guys, and obviously they're must-drafts. Obviously, they're really good players. But we're going to go through guys in all of these rankings that we believe are guys that you should have on your fantasy team when season come, and it doesn't include the obvious guys. If you have a shot at drafting from second round on some of these receivers, you should take a shot at it.
Yeah. No, you must draft Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp.
That's a clear, But these are guys that me and Rick went through a list of rankings on Fantasy Pros and went from ranking 5, which is Stefan Diggs, down all the way probably to like 45 to 50 to find guys that we would call must drafts and tell you why. So that is what we're going to do today. Must draft wide receivers. Let's get to it. The first guy that we have on the list, and somebody that kind of just popped off the sheet for me right away, was CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
And obviously last season was a little bit, I would say, tougher than I would have liked, because I wanted him to have a breakout season, and I believed in him to have a breakout season in 2021. But some big things happened to the Dallas Cowboys over the offseason. They obviously got rid of and cleared the contract of Amari Cooper, which, to be honest with you, we haven't talked about that, but that makes zero sense from a team building perspective, because the guy that you should be getting rid of is Zeke.
Yeah,
you get rid of the.
What are they paying? Yeah, that you're right. That
not the receiver. But anyway, Amari Cooper gets traded to the Cleveland Browns, and essentially opens up a large spot for the Dallas Cowboys. And Rick is going to go over maybe the replacements for Amari Cooper, I would assume, in a second. So I'm not going to steal his thunder. But Last season, he had, with Dallas, 104 targets in 15 total games.
Cooper did.
And so that was basically, I would say, an average of 8 targets a game or so. So that's the target share that is now opened up for the Dallas Cowboys. And that was with a passing attack that decreased in its number of total passes last year because they were winning. I don't want to say, like, Dallas is not a team that should be losing the division with the talent they have, so I think they'll continue to be good. But if they start to suck, then Trash Time Cowboys might be back. I'd love that. That was a good time. The return of the Trash Time Cowboys. So anyway, but there's a lot of vacated targets for the Dallas Cowboys, and those are obviously, and you also lost because Michael Gallup got hurt last year, tore his ACL. So Cedric Wilson was there. He went to Miami. And so that leaves CD and Michael Gallup clear on the roster as it stands right now. Assuming things stand pat, those targets are going to be distributed in different directions. And I think the number one receiver on the Dallas Cowboys, a really good pass catching offense, is going to be CD Lamb. He was already a really, really great wide receiver. He finished last year as the wide receiver 14 through 15 games. So he didn't play all 17. He averaged 12.5 per game. So he's right around that same vicinity. He was a high-end wide receiver too. He had a really good start to the season and kind of fell off, but I think the increased level of target share for CeeDee Lamb is going to elevate him into that conversation of not just a top 10 wide receiver, but the potential of breaking out into the top 5 and becoming one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football next year, just because he's really at this point the only super talented receiver left on the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, Gallup is really good. I don't take anything away from him, but like last year, CeeDee Lamb in 16 games only had 120 targets. That is for sure going to increase to probably 140, 150 this year. And I think it's going to lead to him having a really, really great season. So that's why he's a must draft for me. But Rick, give your thoughts on CeeDee.
Yeah, it's interesting too because people I think are just down on Lamb, or they're really high on him.
His real name is Sedarian Lamb.
Glad we call him CeeDee. Anyway,
things I didn't know until I looked at Pro Football Reference.
Yeah. But he actually had a better year than I think people give him credit for last season. I think just because the expectations were so high, and he definitely did not meet the expectations. But he still had a good year. 120 targets and 79 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. He was a Pro Bowl wide receiver. Like, he really did have a pretty good year. And with Amari Cooper gone, you would expect those targets to go way up. If he can get 150 targets, he's a lock for wide receiver 1. And the touchdown increase, I think, would come with that as well. And then you're talking about a potential top 5 receiver. I think he's a must draft for me too, considering where he's ranked. I believe he's the wide receiver 9. You're probably getting him in the late 2nd, early 3rd round. That's pretty good value to me for a guy who could potentially break out this year and have a monster season. He's clearly the guy in Dallas. There are rumors about them drafting someone. They've interviewed Treylon Burks, Chris Olave. I believe they interviewed another guy. If you just go to the Dallas Cowboys website, the latest,
they'll tell you,
their latest guy that they are doing a piece on is Jameson Williams about a possible pick. Is Jameson Williams the guy for Dallas? So they're in on a ton of receivers, clearly. If they do end up drafting one, that definitely hurts, but CeeDee Lamb will still be the main option, which he has not been his first 2 years in his career.
He had 120 targets last year.
Right.
And through 16 games. And he literally, for the first half of the season, he was pacing at like 140. But if we're going to say he hits 140, 150, and there's 106 or 110 vacated targets left from Amari Cooper leaving, then I would say that even if they add a rookie wide receiver, that he can still get 20 to 30 extra targets to get him to that 130, 140, 150.
Right. Total side note that has nothing to do with the topic, but Kenneth Walker is apparently having, because I'm just looking at rookies who are interviewing with NFL teams, is interviewing with the NFL or the Washington Commanders. So that's amazing. And Rashad White is apparently visiting the Browns and Buccaneers. Why the Browns? Why the Browns and Commanders in on running backs? I hate fantasy football running back NFL situations sometimes. Anyway, back to CeeDee Lamb.
This is so stupid.
Yeah, I do think he's a must draft just because of the opportunity that he has coming up this season. This one could backfire, but if you believe in the talent, he's in a good situation. He's poised for a breakout.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. In the first half of the season, he was playing really, really well.
Right.
Like he was producing top 7-8 numbers, and kind of fell off a little bit towards the back half of the season.
He got injured in that Kansas City game, correct?
I think so. So kind of, it was very disappointing to see a great start for CD end in, a little bit of the way that he ended. So
the last 5-6 weeks of the season, he was just not.
Yeah, he wasn't great. So I think you're definitely going to see, with the absence of Amari Cooper, an increase in production and target share for him, which is going to be great. I remember watching Dallas Cowboy games last year and just getting so frustrated that they continually forced balls to Cedric Wilson and the 5th, 6th wide receiver when they really didn't need to.
Right.
And I'm like, what?
You were getting mad at Dalton Schultz too?
Yeah, I'm like, what the heck are you guys doing? You have a wide receiver you spent a very high-level draft pick on. It's funny, too, when they took him, I was like, they don't need CeeDee Lamb.
No.
And now they do. But anyway, let's move on to the next guy. Rick, tell us a little bit about the number 2 player on the must-draft wide receiver list, which is DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Hopkins for this year, which is funny because I haven't been a DeAndre Hopkins guy in the past for redraft. But this year I am, because I just think he's at a pretty good value. Right now, he's, according to Fantasy Pros, the wide receiver 15.
Yeah.
His best is wide receiver 11, but someone has him ranked as wide receiver 26. I hope I play in a league with that guy. Look, he's old, and I get it. And people, once wide receivers and any player hit a certain age, people are like, oh, he's old, I don't want him. He's going to be 30 this year. He's still 29. So wide receivers can produce at 30 years old, especially if you're at the level of DeAndre Hopkins. So he's still a very good player.
Yeah.
2 years ago, he was considered a top 10 player in the whole league. And I believe he was a top 5 wide receiver, top 6 wide receiver, somewhere in that range. Last year, he wasn't having an awful season before he got hurt. He got hurt in the Green Bay game in week 8.
Yeah.
If you pace his numbers before that, he still was on pace for 80 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 17 touchdowns.
He was the wide through weeks 1 through 7 or 1 through 8. He was the wide receiver 10. I'm confirming that information. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I view him as. I still think he's a low end wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
Who's a very good player still, and I'm not going to say he's in its prime of his career, but he's not in the decline of his career either. He's kind of in the back 9, right?
Yeah.
In Dynasty, you might be looking to sell him, but still has value. Actually, to be honest, if you're contending in Dynasty, he's probably a good buy at this
short
point.
Term. Yeah.
Yeah, for a 2-3 year window, if you're looking to win a championship. But either way, Hopkins, he's obviously still the same player, I think, or close to it. He's still the number 1 guy. They lose Christian Kirk, so we assume Rondale Moore is going to take that role.
Yeah.
But there's still probably going to be a couple targets to go around in that offense.
Yeah.
We're not sure about AJ Green coming back. I think they would replace him in the draft if AJ Green doesn't come back. Maybe Traylon Burks or something like that, because the Cardinals are like the Cowboys, where they just love to draft wide receivers. But either way, with his last year with Arizona, or his first year, I should say, in 2020, he had 160 targets. I'm not saying he gets 160 targets this year, but I think he gets more than the 64 last year, which I don't know what he was on pace for last year, but I think it was 115. I can double check real quick.
I'm looking it up right now.
He was on pace for 109 targets last year. I'm going to bet that he gets more than that because, again, he got injured in a game, and then his first game back, they kind of eased him into it because he ended up, I believe, re-injuring his injury. So because he didn't play the rest of the season or in the playoffs. So DeAndre Hopkins, he's a guy who was hurt last year, an old man, so people are kind of shying away from him. But he's still a good talent, still a good player, still in a good situation. And I think if you can get him in the third round as a wide receiver 1, you're hitting a home run there in your draft.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think he is a smash pick. And I pulled up the rankings because Rick brought up all the really great points for him. Started off the season as a wide receiver 10 basically for the first 8-9 weeks of the season. Then, obviously got hurt, fell off a little bit. But it's clear that you saw what happened to the Arizona Cardinals throughout the season last year, where they were basically undefeated and playing really good football with Hopkins offensively. And then as soon as Hopkins started to miss time, that offense started to stagnate, and so did the Cardinals. So I think that's a direct effect for the Arizona Cardinals as an NFL football team. But because they now know that, now they're going to look at DeAndre Hopkins, I think, with a little bit more importance. And I think that what you saw early in the season is going to happen for the rest. The big thing about this is that he's a smash because of value, is that there's a lot of guys that are ahead of him because people either like them better or because they think Hopkins is an old man. And I think what's happening is the lines between dynasty and dynasty used to be this thing that was like 5-6 years ago. It was like playing what is it that Kevin Coleman does? Devi. People play Devi is like kind of this like small niche and not a lot of people do it. And Dynasty was like that 5 years ago. Not a lot of people did Dynasty fantasy football. It was all redraft. Everyone did redraft and that was it. But as, Dynasty becomes more popular, I think some of the people who rank for Dynasty and for redraft, their rankings start to meld together. And I think that's why Hopkins is 15 right now, to be honest with you. So he's a lot lower on the rankings, but I would take him over guys like Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, even Jalen Waddle at this point, just because those guys aren't going to produce the way Hopkins does. Now, I am a little bit more concerned about his fantasy point production last year because, like Rick said, he was only like pacing out at about 110 targets last year, and a lot of his fantasy points to put him in the top 10 last year were due to the fact that he had I think it was 6-7 touchdowns in the first 8 weeks of the season. So it's interesting to see, I'd love to hear why people have him ranked so low. There's not a single person on Fantasy Pros, if you go look at their rankings, of the 27 experts that they list that have DeAndre Hopkins in their top 10 even. So, right. And his lowest ranking, like Rick said, is 26th. So to me, I think that's a buy. Right now, he's going in the third round, I believe, in drafts. So I would 100% draft DeAndre Hopkins there, and I think he 100% is a must draft. But Underdog has him at pick 30 overall, so that's in the 12 team. That's 6th pick in the third round. Yeah. So yeah, definitely a must draft there. Third guy. And this is a little bit deeper. Like we've seen Lamb be a top 10 wide receiver, top 12. We've seen Hopkins obviously do that over the course of his career. And then there's one other guy on this list that we've seen. One guy that we have not seen do this is Jerry Jeudy, who's the number 3 guy on this list. And Jeudy is he's a really interesting prospect because he was drafted to be this really, I think I had him when he came out as my wide receiver 1. Ahead of CeeDee Lamb. And he obviously... Actually, I remember this. You actually had CeeDee Lamb number 1. Oh, see, and look at this. My guy. I had Jerry Jeudy number 1. For life. See, who was right? Who was right? It was... Okay. All right. We'll see. Why'd you admit that? You could have just let me... No, because I'm a man of truth. Right? But anyway... So, but we... even if I had CeeDee Lamb 1, I still had Jeudy 2. And I think for Jerry Jeudy, obviously there were some concerns, going to the Denver Broncos because he didn't have a really great quarterback. And they've been searching for that one guy for a long time. And they finally got it in Russell Wilson. And that is the difference maker for Jerry Jeudy. He was wide receiver 85 in 2021. I believe he got hurt. And he only played 10 games. But in those 10 games, he averaged 5.6 targets a game, 3.8 receptions, 46 yards per game, and basically 12 yards per reception. That's pretty gross.
Yeah.
Those aren't good numbers. And even if you pace those out, like I can't find a fantasy number that I would be like, boom, this guy's going to be like every single guy on this list has their like, okay, this stat is probably why this guy's going to be good. Jerry Jeudy don't have any of those. Jerry Jeudy has a new quarterback named Russell Wilson, and that's why he's on this list. He is also being drafted. He's very, very like low. Somewhere, I think it was like 78 is what I want to say. 71, 78, something like that. I could be wrong.
Underdog has him 77th overall.
So Jerry Jeudy he's way down boards. And I think he's a more talented, better receiver than Courtland Sutton. I think both guys can have success in this offense, but I think Judy's going to be the one. And I think Russ is a really good quarterback. And I think because of those two things, Jeudy is finally going to get, a lot of receivers that get drafted high don't get a second shot. And not that Jeudy sucked, but like he's been hurt. He hasn't had a quarterback.
Production-wise, he sucked.
He doesn't suck. He's been hurt. He hasn't had a quarterback. And now that he has these things, he can translate that into huge success in the NFL. And I think it's time to move Jerry Jeudy up your boards. I would draft him at any point in the draft. Like if I'm sitting there in the 6th round, 7th round, 8th round, I would draft him. I think he's going to be a smash pick this year and a breakout wide receiver. But some people would say that would be Courtland Sutton. I disagree. Come back to me when Courtland Sutton plays more than 6 games, fellas.
Yikes. Yeah, I do like Sutton. I think he's also good value, but I agree with you where I think Jerry Jeudy, obviously I've been a Jerry Jeudy guy since before he's even drafted. I was very high on him pre-draft because he's one of these very shifty guys that I always talk about at the wide receiver position. I love his route running. He's still very young. He's just turning 23 now. So his breakout age was insane in college, but yeah, he hasn't really done much in the NFL. Last year he had 0 touchdowns. Like
wow.
The passing offense for the Broncos last year was, maybe the worst in the NFL. I think people are underestimating Russell Wilson. I think that's something that's big. I've heard people say that he's, his best days are behind him. He's a good quarterback, but he's always been overrated.
Oh my God.
Stuff like this. But people don't realize how good I think Russell Wilson is. I think when he's on his game, he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And you go from Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock to that, it's going to be a huge difference for someone as talented as Jerry Jeudy. You combine those two things, I think he's a perfect like 6th, 7th round flyer, which is what he is at right now.
Yeah.
For someone who could easily, I think, be a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. I think it's a real possibility.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do like Sutton, but I think Judy's kind of the more talented wide receiver. And I know he's probably going to play the Tyler Lockett role while Sutton plays the Metcalf role. But I said this to you before the show. Would you rather have Lockett or Metcalf if the players were Antonio Brown and DJ Chark, but they just played those roles?
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm not saying it's that big of a talent gap between those two, because it's not with Jerry Jeudy and Sutton. But Jerry Judy's going to play that slot role, but he's the better receiver. Like if Lockett was the better receiver than Metcalf, I don't think it would matter the role they play.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
I mean, I'm a Jeudy guy.
Yeah, we know. He's like, I've been a Jeudy guy since day one.
I have.
He's like, I have. All right, so let's move on to the 4th guy that you should definitely draft. Must draft wide receiver Amari Cooper. And this one is a little bit, we got some old men on this list.
It's redraft.
What can we say?
Amari Cooper.
I usually don't like old men, especially on these must draft lists. But
he's only 27. He's been in the league for like a gazillion years, though.
Yeah, it feels like a gazillion years. But Amari Cooper is on this list, and it's because, obviously we talked about CeeDee Lamb leaving. He now goes to the Cleveland Browns, and right now Cleveland has, Landry's on the market. So Landry was last year their number one wide receiver. It literally is Amari Cooper, Anthony Schwartz.
Yeah.
Who's that other guy that they had who played the outside when Cooper got hurt? I can't remember his name.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know.
Doesn't even matter. No. But Amari Cooper comes in and he is the number one receiver for the Cleveland Browns. And then normally I would have said okay, that's all right. With Baker, he might be decent, but he's not going to be great. And then they added Deshaun Watson. And so let's assume Deshaun Watson plays for a full season. Obviously, I think I would say Watson and Dak are kind of similar. Not necessarily play style wise, but I think talent wise they're the same. So I don't think that Amari Cooper's getting a massive upgrade at quarterback in terms of what he had last year with Dak.
Okay.
I think it's going to be equivalent, but I think because he's the only receiver on the Cleveland Browns, it's going to lead to 120, 130, 140 target season for him, and he's going to be able to produce. And if Deshaun plays the whole season, the Browns offense will probably be good. They already have a very good... This is one of those things. Rick and I were talking about some other players that are on not so great offenses that I was a little bit nervous about. And there's a guy on this list that I'm still he's not on a great offense. I'm a little bit nervous about him. But, with the Browns being a really good offense, having Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, on the ground, having a good tight end, and was it David Njoku, and, having Amari Cooper on the outside, a good offensive line, and now Deshaun Watson, it's going to lead Amari Cooper to similar seasons that he had with Cleveland. Now, the big thing about Cooper is that because he got traded to Cleveland and all the stuff that's happened, he has slid down draft boards. Right now, he is being ranked, according to Fantasy Pros, as the wide receiver 23, which I think is very, very low considering what he can produce as with a quarterback like Dak and in an offense that has a really good running game and a really good, offensive line. So I think Amari Cooper is a really great add. I'm not sure why he is so low. He'll definitely be a mid to high end wide receiver too, and he's a must draft for me.
Yeah, me too. Wide receiver 23 just feels so low. And I think that's just because of the Deshaun Watson thing.
Yeah.
And sure, if Watson gets suspended a year, we're obviously not going to have Cooper in this conversation. But if Watson plays for even majority of the year, if he gets suspended a couple games, I don't think it's a huge deal. If you have Deshaun Watson, I agree. I think it's a slight upgrade from Dak, but it's not really anything that's noticeable, and that's just a me personal thing. I think as a quarterback, purely on the field, I like Watson more than Dak, but it's not a huge difference.
You're a big Deshaun Watson guy, but I think a lot of people overrate Deshaun Watson slightly. I mean, what has he done?
Yeah, I think he went head to head with Mahomes in a playoff game, which Josh Allen did too, but statistically speaking, he's pretty good, but he's not anything that's out of the water. But
I think
his last year in the NFL without DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
It was just Will Fuller was his receiver. He had 33 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions, 4,800 passing yards.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Similar to that.
With the weapons that he had.
Oh yeah, that's true. With the weapons he had, that's definitely
and the O-line.
But yeah. No, and I think with those improved elements, I think it's definitely going to make the offense better. But I don't think Amari Cooper is going to be I don't think he's getting a massive upgrade at quarterback.
No, I mean
from what he had last year. Obviously, if he had Baker, that would be
a downgrade. But
yeah, so
the big thing with him though is, as you were saying, the opportunity. There is no other. I think it was Rashad Higgins was the other guy. I don't know if you said him earlier when you were talking about the Browns receivers.
Oh, yeah.
He is, I think, signed with the Panthers, I want to say. So he's gone. Their only other receivers on the roster is Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz, and I think they have some other crappy like practice squad player. That's it. That's pretty much their depth chart right now. They're gonna probably either draft a guy, or they're gonna bring in Will Fuller or bring back Jarvis Landry, do something like that. But in the meantime, and either way, Cooper's the wide receiver 1 on the Browns. Yeah. And last year with Dallas, he had 104 targets. I think the year before that, though, he had 130. I think with the Browns, he's probably going to be closer to that 130 mark. And if he gets 130 targets, 135 targets in the Browns with around like 85, 90 catches, 1,100 yards, and like 8 touchdowns, that's the high-end wide receiver 2 that you're getting at the wide receiver 23. So that's very good value. He's a very safe pick too. He's one of these guys that I think has a pretty high floor as well as potentially high ceiling, which is kind of rare to get, especially in like the 5th round, wherever he's going to go. By the time we get to August, who knows? But as of right now, I think Amari Cooper, that's pretty good value, and I definitely want to draft him in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Let's move on to the final guy. If my computer would load anything properly, that would be wonderful. It's taking so long. There we go. All right, here we go. So I finally can talk about the last guy, which is number 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown, must-draft wide receiver. Amon-Ra is an interesting argument, and like right now, I think, what did we say he was getting drafted at? Was he in the 70s as well?
Yeah, it's weird because on Sleeper, he's in the 70s, yes.
What is he in best ball?
So I just looked at this. He's 51, which is higher than the guys we just talked about.
Yeah, so on Sleeper, he's 78. On Underdog, he is 51, so a little bit higher. But I think the interesting thing about Amon-Ra St. Brown is, and the argument is, because they don't have a high flying offense like what you're gonna see with what Dallas had last year, even with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, right? Or you saw from like the Bengals with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. You know what I mean? Like 2 receivers can have great fantasy success in the same offense, but a lot of people are like fighting over whether Amon-Ra and DJ Chark play the same role or not. And if you watch the film and you understand what both of these guys do, the Lions, like, people in the NFL don't just bring guys in to bring guys in. Like, they bring in players that can play specific roles, especially at the wide receiver position. Chark is an outside receiver. Amon-Ra is a slot receiver. They play 2 very different roles. And I look at this with Jared Goff. In the past, he's had 3 wide receivers that he's been able to turn into. Well, he doesn't pass it as much as that, and the Lions will not pass it as much as that. But he's had 3 wide receivers that he's been able to turn into wide receiver 1s. But essentially, to Jared Goff, this is essentially Brandon Cooks on the outside with DJ Chark and the slot receiver Cooper Kupp in Amon-Ra St. Brown. And St. Brown is going to play the slot. It's as simple as that. They do not play the same role. I don't care how many times you can go on your YouTube channel and say it. They don't play the same role. So with that being the case, I do think that there's going to be a little bit of a target hit for Amon-Ra based on what we saw at the end of the season.
Based on the end of the season.
Yeah, based on the end of the season. So this is when rookie wide receivers, by the way, start to come on. They start to figure things in the NFL out, and they get better later and later in the season. So from weeks 12 or week 13 to week 18, Amon-Ra St. Brown had 190 targets, an average of 11.2 targets per game. He was pacing
on pace for 190
targets. He did not have 190 targets in 7 weeks. He had 190 targets paced out for a full season. He had 144 catches paced out for a full season, 1,587 yards and 14 touchdowns. Even if you look at this and say, all right, he's going to lose target share based on those numbers.
He was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy behind Cooper Kupp
in that stretch, yeah. So even if he loses that, he's not going to get 190 targets. But even if he loses target share to DJ Chark, it's going to be in the vicinity of, like, I would say 50 targets or so. And if he was pacing out at this 190 total, he'd still hit 140. And so if that's the case, he can get that yards per reception up a little bit. I think he's a smash wide receiver. And Chark has also had a ton of injury history. So that's something that you need to consider. And I think they play two very different roles. And I don't like at this point in Jared Goff's career, do you think he's going to be going to the field stretcher, or is he going to be going to the guy underneath? He always goes.
No, he's going to the guy underneath. I will say Hawkinson did not play in any of those games. He played the first one against Minnesota. So in that game against Minnesota where Hawkinson did play, Amon-Ra still had a high target share, and I've seen that by people who are very against Amon-Ra, that Hawkinson was out during that stretch, and he only had that kind of target. I think Swift was also out. So he only had that kind of target share because the star players were out. But in that game against Minnesota, he still had a high target share. And I think you don't just have a run like that and just kind of forget about it. You know, his spot in the offense is solidified, and he's going to be the go-to slot guy. So for a PPR, he's going to put up high numbers. He's another guy with a very high floor, kind of like Cooper, in my opinion. The touchdowns, obviously, it's not a great offense, so I don't know if he's going to be. He was on pace for like 14 touchdowns in that stretch. That I don't think will continue. But I think he'll have a good season. And depending on where he gets drafted, if it's the sleeper one where he's like in the 70s or whatever, that's very solid value.
Yeah, that's PPR. A great value.
Where he could be really just a good wide receiver too.
50, you're eating it a little bit.
Yeah. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, you're taking a big
it's like
risk.
25 pick difference, 26 pick difference.
At that point, he ends up a 4th round pick, and then you're taking a little bit of a risk on Amon-Ra, which I would still do because I believe in the talent and I believe in the target share in the player. So, I mean, obviously, adding Chark to the offense, knowing how you need to break down target share and stuff like that, it does kind of suck. But all of these receivers that they had, like Khalif Raymond and some other guys that they were just peppering targets to because they didn't have a wide receiver one, for the most part in the first like 10 weeks of the season, it just was kind of a free-for-all for everyone. And then obviously Amon-Ra came forward later in the season to pick up a target share, but that's why I think you're going to see, like he's not going to get 190 targets, but he'll probably hit 130. And if that's the case and he improves in some of the other areas of his game, I think he can definitely have a really great season. If they had not added Chark, I would be even higher on him, which I don't know how that's even possible. But
I don't think it hurts much.
The one big red flashing light is the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
And I don't mind where things are going for them. They add Chark. They have a decent offensive line. They have a good two decent running backs.
Number 2 overall pick.
The number 2 overall pick, TJ Hawkinson. So it's like the offense actually, I think, is very underrated. And they had a lot of games last year, like a lot of games where they were very close to winning.
They were the best worst team in the league. They through those games where Amon-Ra St. Brown had 190 paced out targets, they were 3-3. But they had a game against Chicago, they lost 14-16. They had a game against Cleveland, they lost 10-13. They had a game they tied against Pittsburgh, 16-16. They had a game earlier in the season against Minnesota where they lost by 2. They had a game against Baltimore where they lost by 2. I think they missed a field goal at the end of that game to lose. So it's like you literally kind of look at that, and there's an argument for 7 or 8 wins for this terrible team. I think their offense is underrated, and I think their team kind of was underrated a little bit. And they add that big pick. Not saying they're a 10-win team, but I think the offense is going to be
a little bit better than they were last year, and I
Right.
wouldn't be concerned about it being the Detroit Lions offense. I think there's some good things to see in this offense that we could go, because Goff is serviceable. He's not
Sure.
he's not going to blow the doors off teams, but he's serviceable.
And I'm not telling you this is great, but they did have Hawkinson out for a lot of the season. They had Swift out for a lot of the season, and they were the 22nd offense in the league. So it's actually like if those guys were healthy last year, it'd probably be like a mediocre, like average offense.
Yeah.
That's not that bad, considering everybody. Like it was better than the Jets, the Jaguars. It was better than Houston, the Giants, the Panthers, the Falcons, the Saints, the Dolphins, the Bears. It was even better than the Steelers. So the offense is not great, but it's better. Like you make a very good point. It's better than what people say it is.
Yeah, I think it's just fun to trash on the Lions.
Yeah, it is.
To pound on the Lions. There's like offenses like there was a guy that we were toying with a little bit to put on this list, Darnell Mooney, and the reason why he didn't make the list is specifically because, Chicago, even with Justin Fields, like I'm excited about the quarterback, but offensively, like their offensive line's not great. They don't really have a big wide receiver one. Obviously we would consider Mooney somebody that could be that, but he's going to have a lot of pressure on him because he's going to have to take literally everything. And then Justin Fields had some good games and some bad games last year, so we're going to have to see where he goes. They have, a new offense that they're implementing, a new head coach. It's just, there's a lot of stuff going on in Chicago, and I'm not excited about it. And I would honestly right now, like I would take the quarterback over Jared Goff, but based on the offensive situation, I would take the Lions offense. If you drop Justin Fields on the Lions, people would be losing their crap.
Oh yeah.
So, not saying the Lions are like this elite, awesome offense, but I think they're better than people think. I think they're going to score points. The point is, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to get some scoring opportunities, even though the thought process is that the Lions.
Right. I don't think he's getting 3 receiving touchdowns.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 5 on the season, and all of them came down the stretch.
Right.
So, I think he's
not a player that needs like 20. He doesn't need like 15 receiving touchdowns. Like if he just gets like 7 or 8, I think he's in a pretty good spot.
And he's gonna be because he's a slot guy. Like he's gonna be a guy that gets 8 catches a game.
Right.
So we'll have to see where DJ Chark slots in and all that stuff, and even like what my projections look like come around July and August, and see where I have Amon-Ra. But I think he's definitely a must draft. So
I agree with that.
there you go. Must draft wide receivers. Do you have anything else to add, Rick?
I think that's it.
Our must draft wide receivers: CeeDee Lamb, DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're gonna do must draft wide receivers next week, and maybe another rookie draft. So we'll definitely see you then, guys. Bye.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.